Dr. Zephyr Kine had always been fascinated by extinct species. As the lead xenobiologist aboard the research vessel Nexus Prime, he spent most of his days cataloging the remains of civilizations that had long since turned to dust. The Galactic Federation's archaeological division had discovered something unprecedented on a barren world at the edge of known space. A perfectly preserved specimen from a species called humans, encased in what appeared to be primitive cryogenic technology. The specimen had been found in the ruins of what was once Earth, a planet that had been glassed during the Great Purge 300 years ago. According to Federation records, humans were a violent, primitive species that had been eliminated for the safety of galactic civilization. They were described as irrational warmongers who couldn't be reasoned with, a species so dangerous that the Galactic Council had unanimously voted for their extinction. Zephyr, a tall, slender being with blue-tinged skin and large, intelligent eyes, carefully examined the frozen human through the reinforced viewing panel. The creature was smaller than he'd expected, roughly 6 feet in height with short brown hair and what appeared to be various scars across his visible skin. The human wore some kind of military uniform, though the insignia were unfamiliar to Zephyr's database. "Remarkable preservation," muttered his assistant, Dr. Lyra Voss, a fellow Keplerians like himself. "The cellular structure appears completely intact. This cryogenic system, though primitive by our standards, has maintained perfect suspension for centuries." Captain Thane Rourke of the Federation Security Corps observed from across the laboratory. The imposing draconian officer's scales shifted from deep green to amber, a sign of unease among his species. "I still don't understand why Command approved this resurrection project, Dr. Kine. The humans were exterminated for good reason. Our ancestors fought wars against these creatures." Zephyr adjusted his scanning equipment, his four-fingered hands dancing across the holographic controls. "Captain, that's precisely why this discovery is so valuable. We only have second-hand accounts of human capabilities. Most of our records were compiled by species that fought against them, naturally biased toward portraying humans as monsters. This specimen could provide invaluable scientific data about their true nature." The human's vital signs were slowly stabilizing as the automated revival process continued. Zephyr had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying every scrap of available data about human physiology. The Federation Medical Database contained surprisingly little information about their internal biology. Most records focused on their weapons technology and tactical capabilities. "Look at these neural patterns." Lyra pointed to a series of oscillating waves on her monitor. "The brain activity is unlike anything I've seen. Even in deep suspension, there's considerable activity in regions associated with memory consolidation and threat assessment." Captain Rourke's hand instinctively moved toward his plasma sidearm. "Which is exactly why this experiment concerns me. We're talking about a species that held off the combined forces of 12 Federation worlds for over 50 years. A species that developed weapons capable of cracking planets. Zephyr had heard the stories, of course. Every child in Federation space knew about the human wars, the bloodiest conflict in galactic history. Humans had apparently developed something called kinetic bombardment technology that could turn asteroids into planet-killing weapons. They'd also created autonomous war machines and engaged in something called total warfare that targeted civilian populations. But Zephyr was a scientist, not a historian. He believed in observable evidence, not propaganda from 3 centuries past. As he watched the human's eyes begin to flutter beneath closed lids, he felt a thrill of scientific discovery that outweighed any concerns about ancient conflicts. The revival chamber's atmosphere processors hummed steadily, gradually adjusting the environment to match ancient Earth conditions. The oxygen-nitrogen mixture was considered mildly toxic by most Federation species, but the human's physiology had evolved specifically for this harsh combination. Temperature readings showed the subject's body warming to what databases indicated was normal human operating temperature. Neural activity is increasing exponentially, Lyra reported, her voice tinged with excitement. I'm seeing activation patterns in regions we don't fully understand. The human brain appears to have neural pathways that don't exist in any other known species. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the laboratory. The human's eyes snapped open, sharp, blue, and immediately alert in a way that made everyone in the room take an involuntary step backward. Unlike other species that gradually regained consciousness after extended stasis, this human appeared to transition from unconsciousness to full awareness in mere seconds. The subject's head turned slowly, taking in his surroundings with methodical precision. His gaze swept across the various alien faces staring at him, and Zephyr noted that the human's expression remained completely neutral, not confused or frightened as one might expect, but calculating. "Where am I?" The human's voice was surprisingly calm, spoken in what Zephyr's translator identified as English, a language that hadn't been heard in 3 centuries. Zephyr stepped forward, trying to project calm authority. "You're aboard a Federation research vessel. I'm Dr. Zephyr Kine. You've been in cryogenic suspension for approximately 300 years. Do you remember your name?" The human sat up slowly, and Zephyr was struck by how efficiently he moved. Every motion seemed purposeful, controlled. "Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reeves, United Earth Defense Force, serial number 2847 Delta 7. His eyes fixed on Captain Rourke's uniform. "And your Federation military, which means Earth lost the war." The directness of the statement caught everyone off guard. There was no emotion in the human's voice, no grief, no shock, just cold acceptance of reality. Captain Rourke stepped forward, his scales shifting to a more aggressive orange hue. The human resistance was eliminated 300 years ago. You're the last of your species, a specimen preserved for scientific study. Marcus, for that was apparently his name, simply nodded. I see. And now you've revived me to study how we fought, to understand how a primitive species held off your entire civilization for half a century. His lips curved in what might have been a smile, but there was no humor in it. I suppose that makes sense from a tactical perspective. Zephyr found himself fascinated by the human's reaction. Most species would be devastated by news of their civilization's destruction, but Marcus seemed to be treating it as simply another piece of tactical information to be processed and filed away. Actually, Zephyr said carefully, I revived you to study human biology and behavior. The Federation has very little accurate information about your species beyond military records. Marcus's sharp blue eyes focused on him with uncomfortable intensity. Dr. Kine, was it? Let me save you some time with your research. You made a mistake bringing me back. He gestured around the laboratory with one scarred hand. Your people spent 3 centuries telling themselves that humans were monsters, that we were some kind of galactic threat that had to be eliminated. You convinced yourselves that wiping out an entire species was justified because we were too dangerous to be allowed to exist. The human swung his legs off the examination table and stood, moving with a predator's grace that made everyone in the room tense. Even weakened from centuries of suspension, there was something inherently threatening about his presence. The thing is, Marcus continued, his voice remaining conversational, you weren't wrong about us being dangerous. You were just wrong about thinking you'd eliminated the threat. He looked directly at Captain Rourke. Tell me, Captain, in the 300 years since the Great Purge, how many wars has the Federation fought? Rourke's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a defensive purple. The Federation has maintained galactic peace for 3 centuries. Minor conflicts have been resolved diplomatically or through limited police actions. Marcus nodded slowly. No major wars, no existential threats, no species desperate enough to develop planet-killing weapons or fight to the last man, woman, and child. His smile returned, cold and predatory. You've had 300 years of peace because you eliminated the one species that refused to submit to your authority. But now you've brought one of us back. The implications of the statement hung heavy in the recycled air of the laboratory. Zephyr realized that his scientific curiosity might have unleashed something far more dangerous than he'd anticipated. You're contained aboard a Federation vessel, Captain Rourke said, his voice tight with barely controlled aggression. One human, no matter how dangerous your species was, cannot threaten galactic civilization. Marcus looked around the laboratory again, and Zephyr could practically see the human's mind cataloging every detail: escape routes, potential weapons, weaknesses in their security. It was like watching a predator size up its prey. Captain, Marcus said softly, You really don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Humans didn't fight your people because we were naturally violent or because we enjoyed war. We fought because we refused to be slaves. Because when faced with the choice between submission and extinction, we chose to make extinction as expensive as possible for our enemies. He took a step toward the sealed laboratory door, and Zephyr noticed that every security sensor in the room immediately focused on the human's movement. The Federation won the war by committing genocide, Marcus continued. You killed billions of civilians, glassed entire worlds, and convinced yourselves it was necessary for galactic peace. But genocide doesn't eliminate ideas, Captain. It doesn't eliminate the knowledge of how to resist, how to fight, how to make your enemies pay for every inch of ground. The human's eyes swept across the assembled aliens one more time, and Zephyr felt a chill run down his spine at the calculation he saw there. You see, Dr. Kine wanted to study human nature, Marcus said. But you're about to get a much more comprehensive education than you bargained for, because I remember everything. Every tactic, every strategy, every piece of technology that made humans the nightmare that haunted your ancestors' dreams. The security alarms began blaring again as the ship's AI detected elevated stress patterns from all the aliens in the room. But Marcus just stood there, calm and patient, like a man who had all the time in the world to plan his next move. Dr. Zephyr Kine was beginning to realize that his scientific curiosity might have doomed them all. The first sign that Marcus was more than he appeared came during the routine psychological evaluation 2 days after his revival. Dr. Lyra Voss had prepared a comprehensive battery of tests designed to assess cognitive function, emotional stability, and potential threat levels. What she discovered defied every assumption the Federation had made about human mental capacity. His cognitive processing speed is unlike anything in our databases, Lyra reported to the senior staff meeting. He completed complex spatial reasoning tests in half the time it takes most species, and his pattern recognition abilities are bordering on precognitive. Captain Rourke sat at the head of the conference table, his scales a deep amber that indicated sustained stress. What about aggression indicators, psychological stability? That's where it gets concerning, Lyra continued, projecting a holographic display of test results. Standard psychological profiles suggest he should be displaying signs of severe trauma, awakening to find his species extinct, being held captive by former enemies. Instead, his stress indicators remain remarkably low. It's as if he's compartmentalized the emotional impact and is focusing entirely on information gathering. Commander Zillows, the ship's arachnoid intelligence officer, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Information gathering for what purpose? That's what worries me, Lyra admitted. Every question I asked him, he answered, but I could tell he was simultaneously analyzing me, my reactions, my knowledge base, my authority level within the ship's hierarchy. He wasn't just taking a psychological test, he was conducting one. Zephyr had been observing Marcus through security feeds for the past 48 hours, and he'd noticed similar patterns. The human spent most of his time in his quarters appearing to rest, but the passive scans showed his brain activity remained elevated. Marcus was thinking, planning, and according to the ship's AI, he'd been testing the environmental controls in his quarters. Testing how? Captain Rourke demanded when Zephyr shared this information. Small variations in temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, Zephyr explained. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger alerts, but consistent patterns that suggest he's mapping the ship's environmental systems. The draconian captain's scales shifted to an aggressive orange. He's been imprisoned for less than 3 days, and he's already probing our systems. It gets worse, Commander Zillows interjected. Security reports indicate he's been asking very specific questions during meal deliveries, not about his situation or demands for release, technical questions about ship operations, crew complement, standard Federation protocols. Marcus had been remarkably cooperative during his incarceration, which had initially relieved the crew. He accepted his meals without complaint, submitted to medical examinations, and answered questions during interviews. But Zephyr was beginning to realize that the human's compliance was strategic rather than genuine resignation. I've been reviewing historical records about human tactical doctrine, Zillows continued. They called it intelligence gathering through social engineering. Humans were apparently masters at extracting information from their captors by appearing harmless and cooperative. Captain Rourke stood abruptly, his tail lashing behind him in agitation. Recommendation, Commander. Enhanced security protocols immediately. No more casual interaction with the subject. All information exchange should be strictly controlled. But even as they implemented tighter security measures, Marcus continued to demonstrate capabilities that unnerved the crew. During a routine medical scan, he'd somehow identified the specific model of scanner being used and casually mentioned its operational parameters, information that should have been impossible for him to know. How could he possibly know technical specifications for equipment that was developed centuries after his people were extinct? Dr. Voss asked during another emergency briefing. Zephyr had been thinking about that very question. I've been analyzing the preserved equipment found with him. That cryogenic system wasn't as primitive as we initially thought. The engineering was actually quite sophisticated, different from our approach, but arguably more efficient in some ways. Your point, Doctor. What if we've been underestimating human technological development? What if the records from the war focused so much on their weapons that we missed their other innovations? The possibility was disturbing. Federation historical records portrayed humans as a species that had stumbled onto dangerous military technology, but remained primitive in other areas. If that assessment was wrong, It meant Marcus might possess knowledge that could pose a genuine threat to ship security. Their concerns proved justified when Marcus made his first escape attempt. It happened during a shift change, when security protocols were momentarily relaxed. The human had somehow managed to override the electronic lock on his quarters, not by brute force or sophisticated hacking, but by exploiting a flaw in the lock's programming that even the ship's engineers hadn't known existed. He made it 3 corridors before security teams cornered him. But what disturbed Captain Rourke most was how far Marcus had traveled in such a short time. The human had moved through the ship with obvious familiarity, taking routes that suggested intimate knowledge of Federation vessel design. How? Rourke demanded during Marcus's interrogation. How did you know the ship's layout? Marcus sat calmly in the reinforced interrogation chair, showing no signs of stress despite being surrounded by armed guards. Standard Federation design principles haven't changed much in 3 centuries, Captain. Your people prioritize efficiency over security, which creates predictable patterns. That's impossible. You've been unconscious for 300 years. I've been observing your crew for 3 days, Marcus replied. Watching how they move, where they go, how long different tasks take. Basic intelligence gathering. Your people aren't trained to recognize surveillance from a supposedly contained subject. The casual way he discussed surveillance techniques sent chills through the assembled officers. This wasn't a desperate prisoner lashing out. This was a professional gathering intelligence and testing defenses. What was your objective? Commander Zillows clicked his mandibles aggressively. Where were you trying to go? Marcus's blue eyes fixed on the arachnoid with uncomfortable intensity. I wasn't trying to escape, Commander. I was testing response times, security protocols, and crew competency levels. His lips curved in that cold smile again. Valuable information for future planning. Captain Rourke's scales flushed deep red, a color that indicated barely controlled rage among Draconians. Future planning for what? That depends entirely on what you plan to do with me, Marcus said. If you're content to keep me as a laboratory specimen for Dr. Kine's research, then my objectives remain limited. But something tells me that won't be the case much longer. The human's prediction proved accurate. Within hours of his failed escape attempt, subspace communications began arriving from Federation Command. Word of the revived human had reached the highest levels of government, and suddenly everyone wanted to know about the last member of humanity's most dangerous military caste. Admiral Korath, Supreme Commander of Federation forces, appeared via holographic transmission with an expression that made Captain Rourke's aggressive displays seem mild by comparison. The ancient Draconian's scales were pure black, a color that indicated lethal intent. Captain Rourke, you will transfer the human specimen to Federation Central Command immediately. The Council of Species wishes to conduct their own investigation. Zephyr felt his blood chill at the implications. Federation's Central Command wasn't a research facility. It was the military's primary interrogation and intelligence center. If Marcus was transferred there, he would disappear into a black hole of classified programs and enhanced interrogation techniques. Admiral, with respect, the subject requires continued medical observation. The revival process is complete. Admiral Korath cut him off. Dr. Kine, your scientific curiosity has potentially compromised galactic security. The human will be transferred to specialists who understand how to handle dangerous prisoners. After the transmission ended, Captain Rourke turned to his senior staff with grim determination. We have 18 hours before the transfer ship arrives. I want every security protocol reviewed, every system checked. That human is not going to cause any more problems aboard my vessel. But Marcus seemed to know about the transfer order before anyone told him. When guards arrived to move him to a more secure cell, he was sitting calmly on his bunk, fully dressed and apparently waiting for them. Time to go, he asked conversationally. The security chief, a massive Ursinian named Lieutenant Grask, growled low in his throat. How did you know about the transfer order? Marcus stood and extended his hands for restraints without being asked. Lucky guess. Though I should mention, Lieutenant, that transferring me to Federation Central Command is probably the worst decision your superiors could make. Why's that human? Marcus looked directly at the security cameras, and Zephyr realized the human was speaking to everyone monitoring the feed, including Captain Rourke and the senior staff. Because keeping me contained on a single ship limits my options, Marcus said calmly. But Federation's Central Command is connected to every major military network in the galaxy. It's where you keep your most sensitive intelligence, your strategic plans, your weapon specifications. That cold smile returned. It's also where you train your best interrogators, which means it's where I'll learn the most about current Federation capabilities. The implications of his statement hit everyone simultaneously. Marcus wasn't being transferred to a more secure prison. He was being given access to the heart of Federation military intelligence. You think they won't be able to contain you? Lieutenant Grask snarled. Lieutenant, Marcus said as the restraints clicked into place, your people have spent 3 centuries convincing yourselves that you eliminated humanity because we were too dangerous to exist. But you never really understood what made us dangerous. He looked directly into the nearest camera. It wasn't our weapons or our technology. It was our refusal to accept defeat, no matter how hopeless the situation appeared. As security guards escorted Marcus toward the detention bay, Zephyr realized that his scientific experiment had become something far more significant. The last human wasn't just a specimen to be studied. He was a weapon that had been dormant for 3 centuries, and they'd just armed and aimed it at the heart of the Federation. The galaxy was about to remember why humanity had been considered too dangerous to live. The transfer to Federation Central Command took place exactly as scheduled, but something went wrong during the handoff. Captain Rourke received the first indication of trouble when emergency beacons began broadcasting from the transport vessel Retribution less than 6 hours after departure. "This is Commander Vex aboard the Retribution," came the panicked transmission. "We have a code black security breach. The human specimen has escaped containment and... The transmission cut to static. Captain Rourke immediately ordered his ship to intercept the transport's last known coordinates, but what they found defied all expectations. The Retribution was intact, its hull undamaged and life support systems functioning normally. But when boarding parties forced their way inside, they discovered a scene that would haunt Federation security forces for years to come. The entire crew of 47 beings was alive, but unconscious, sedated by the ship's own medical systems. The transport's computer logs showed that someone had accessed the vessel's automated medical bay and programmed it to release knockout gas into the ventilation system. But the truly disturbing part was how the sabotage had been accomplished. He used their own security codes, Commander Zillows reported after analyzing the computer records. Someone provided the human with command-level access to the ship's systems. Captain Rourke's scales flushed deep red. That's impossible. How could he have obtained security codes? According to the logs, Commander Vex gave them to him voluntarily during what appears to have been a normal interrogation session. The boarding party's investigation revealed that Marcus had spent less than 3 hours aboard the Retribution before implementing his escape plan. In that time, he'd somehow convinced the ship's commanding officer to provide him with the access codes needed to take control of the vessel's systems. Dr. Lyra Voss, who had accompanied the boarding party to study the scene, made an even more disturbing discovery. "Captain, I've analyzed the interrogation recordings. The human didn't threaten Commander Vex or use any form of coercion. He simply talked to him." He talked about what? Philosophy, apparently. Questions about the nature of justice, the ethics of genocide, whether the Federation's actions during the war were justified. Lyra's expression was troubled. By the end of the conversation, Commander Vex seemed to believe that keeping the human prisoner was morally wrong. The recordings were indeed disturbing to review. Marcus had somehow identified psychological vulnerabilities in the Zeltrian commander and exploited them with surgical precision. He'd asked pointed questions about the extinction of entire species, the targeting of civilian populations, the ethics of collective punishment for the actions of governments. "Your people fought a war against human military forces," Marcus had said during the interrogation. "But the solution was to eliminate every man, woman, and child of my species, including infants who had never held a weapon. Does that seem just to you, Commander?" Within 2 hours, Commander Vex had been providing Marcus with detailed information about Federation military doctrine, current political tensions between member species, and eventually, the access codes that allowed the human to take control of the ship. It's a form of psychological warfare we've never encountered, Commander Zillows observed. He doesn't attack minds directly. He finds moral conflicts within his captors and amplifies them until they begin to question their own actions. Captain Rourke was forced to report the escape to Federation Command, a conversation that went about as poorly as expected. Admiral Korath's holographic image seemed to radiate fury even through the transmission. Captain, you were responsible for securing the most dangerous prisoner in Federation space, and you allowed him to escape during a routine transfer. Admiral, the human didn't escape through force or traditional methods. He convinced the transport crew to release him voluntarily. Convinced them how? Psychological manipulation, sir. He identified moral conflicts within the crew and exploited them to achieve cooperation. The Admiral's scales shifted to an even deeper black. Captain Rourke, you're describing a level of psychological sophistication that shouldn't be possible for a primitive species. Sir, I'm beginning to think our assessment of human capabilities was fundamentally flawed. Admiral Korath was silent for several long moments before responding. The Council of Species is implementing Emergency Protocol 7. All Federation worlds are to be placed on high alert. Military patrols are being tripled, and all civilian populations are being warned about potential human infiltration. The scope of the response seemed excessive for one escaped prisoner, but Captain Rourke was beginning to understand the broader implications. If Marcus could convince experienced military officers to betray their oaths within hours of meeting them, what could he accomplish with access to civilian populations? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. Broadcasts began appearing on civilian communication networks throughout Federation space. At first, they seemed like random pirate transmissions, brief messages that interrupted regularly scheduled programming before being shut down by automated security systems. But the content of these messages was deeply disturbing to Federation authorities. Marcus appeared on screen wearing the uniform of a Federation officer, apparently broadcasting from the bridge of a captured vessel. But rather than making demands or issuing threats, he simply spoke directly to civilian audiences about the history of the human wars. "Citizens of the Federation," he said in one broadcast, "your governments have told you that humans were a violent species that threatened galactic peace. But they haven't told you how the war began, or why my people chose to fight rather than submit to Federation authority." The broadcasts included historical records that had been classified for 3 centuries, documentation of Federation demands for human submission, recordings of diplomatic meetings where human representatives were told their species would be relocated to reservation worlds, evidence of early Federation military actions against human colonies. The Federation demanded that humanity surrender our independence and accept protectorate status, Marcus continued in another broadcast. When we refused, they blockaded our trade routes, seized our colonies, and began what they called police actions against civilian targets. The war didn't begin because humans were aggressive. It began because we refused to become slaves. Even more disturbing were the technical specifications Marcus somehow possessed. He broadcast detailed information about current Federation military capabilities, weapon systems that were supposedly classified at the highest levels, and strategic weaknesses in the defensive networks protecting major worlds. How does he know this information? Admiral Korath demanded during an emergency session with the Council of Species. These technical specifications are classified beyond top-secret levels. General Thax, the Federation's chief intelligence officer, provided an answer that sent chills through the assembled representatives. Admiral, we've analyzed the broadcasts and cross-referenced them with our security databases. The human appears to have accessed classified military networks during his brief time aboard Federation vessels. That's impossible. Our computer systems have multiple layers of security. Sir, our security was designed to prevent conventional hacking attempts and external infiltration. It wasn't designed to prevent someone with legitimate access codes from downloading information while pretending to be a cooperative prisoner. The realization hit the council like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just escaped. He'd been gathering intelligence from the moment he was revived. Every medical scan, every psychological evaluation, every conversation with crew members had been an opportunity to collect information about current Federation capabilities. But the broadcasts served another purpose beyond intelligence gathering. They were having a profound psychological effect on civilian populations throughout the Federation. Species that had accepted the official narrative about human extinction for 3 centuries were suddenly confronted with evidence that the war had been far more complex than they'd been told. Protests began erupting on worlds throughout Federation space. Not in support of Marcus, few civilians were ready to openly support a human, but demanding answers about the classified historical records he'd revealed. Why had the true circumstances of the war been kept secret? What other information had their governments hidden from them? The political situation deteriorated rapidly when Marcus's broadcasts began targeting specific Federation leaders. He provided detailed biographical information about council members, including their personal roles in authorizing genocide against human populations. Names, dates, specific decisions that had led to the deaths of billions. Counselor Vrex, Marcus said during one broadcast, looking directly into the camera. You were the one who suggested using kinetic bombardment against Earth's civilian population centers. You argued that eliminating human breeding facilities would end the war more quickly than continued military engagement. The fact that Marcus had access to 300-year-old classified records suggested intelligence capabilities that terrified Federation leadership. If he could access historical archives, what other information systems had he penetrated? The answer became clear when critical infrastructure began failing throughout Federation space. Not through direct attack, but through subtle sabotage that suggested intimate knowledge of system vulnerabilities. Power grids experienced unexplained fluctuations, communication networks suffered temporary outages, and transportation systems developed mysterious scheduling conflicts. None of the failures were catastrophic, but the patterns suggested that someone with comprehensive knowledge of Federation infrastructure was conducting systematic probing attacks, testing defenses, identifying weaknesses, preparing for something larger. He's mapping our entire civilization, General Thax reported to an increasingly desperate council of species. Every system failure provides him with information about our response capabilities, backup systems, and security protocols. Admiral Korath's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. General, you're describing capabilities that exceed anything in our historical records about human technology. Sir, I don't think this is about technology anymore. This individual appears to possess an understanding of psychological warfare, information systems, and strategic planning that goes beyond what we thought possible for any single being. The Council was forced to confront a terrifying possibility. They hadn't just revived a human warrior from the past. They'd awakened something that understood their civilization better than they understood themselves, and it was systematically dismantling 3 centuries of carefully maintained galactic peace. Marcus had been free for less than 2 weeks, but he'd already demonstrated that a single human with sufficient knowledge and motivation could threaten the stability of an entire galactic civilization. The Federation was beginning to understand why their ancestors had been so terrified of humanity that they'd chosen genocide over coexistence. The first major attack came without warning and targeted the one thing the Federation considered absolutely secure, their primary military command center on Kepler Station. The massive orbital facility housed the Strategic Planning Division for all Federation forces, maintained real-time communication with fleets throughout the galaxy, and contained the central databases for military intelligence operations. It should have been impregnable. The station was protected by overlapping defensive shields, patrolled by an entire battle fleet, and monitored by the most sophisticated sensor arrays in Federation space. Access required multiple levels of biometric authentication, and even senior officers needed escort when moving through sensitive areas. Marcus walked through the front door. Security recordings showed him approaching the station aboard a civilian transport, wearing the uniform of a Federation logistics officer and carrying identification that passed every security check. He moved through the facility with casual confidence, nodding to guards who recognized his apparent rank and accessing restricted areas with codes that authenticated perfectly in the system. It wasn't until he reached the central command center that anyone realized something was wrong. "Attention, Federation Command," Marcus announced, his voice broadcasting simultaneously through the station's communication system and across all military networks in the galaxy. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reeves, and I'm here to discuss terms for humanity's surrender." The assembled officers in the command center froze in shock. A human, the human they'd been hunting for weeks, was standing calmly in the heart of their most secure facility, apparently having bypassed every security measure designed to prevent exactly this scenario. General Voss, the station commander, reached for his sidearm, but Marcus raised a hand in a gesture that somehow conveyed both authority and warning. "General, I'd advise against that. Your security systems are currently under my control, and any aggressive action will trigger defensive measures that would be unfortunate for everyone involved." As if to demonstrate his point, the massive display screens around the command center flickered and changed to show detailed schematics of the station's internal systems: power distribution, life support, defensive arrays, and weapons systems. All of them showed green status indicators that had somehow changed to Marcus's direct control. "How?" General Voss demanded, his scales shifting through multiple colors in rapid succession. "Your people have a fundamental misunderstanding about warfare, General," Marcus replied conversationally. "You think in terms of ships and weapons and territorial control, but real warfare, the kind humans specialized in, is about information, psychology, and system exploitation." He gestured to the screens around them, which now displayed real-time intelligence about Federation military deployments throughout the galaxy. "For the past 3 weeks, I've been inside your computer networks, your communication systems, your strategic databases, not through external hacking, but through the access codes and security clearances your own officers provided. Every conversation, every interrogation, every security briefing has given me deeper access to your systems." The implications were staggering. Marcus hadn't just infiltrated individual ships or facilities. He'd penetrated the entire Federation military network by exploiting the trust and authority structures that held their civilization together. "I know the location and strength of every Federation fleet," Marcus continued. "I have complete records of your strategic reserves, your supply lines, your defensive capabilities. I know which of your allies are reliable and which are questioning their loyalty to the Federation cause." Admiral Korath's image appeared on the main display screen, his scales pure black with rage. "Human, you're surrounded by the entire Federation fleet. Surrender now and you'll be granted a quick death." Marcus looked directly at the camera, transmitting his image to Federation Command. Admiral, that's exactly the kind of thinking that lost you the war the first time. You're still thinking in terms of superior firepower and overwhelming force. But I'm not here to fight your fleet. The display screens changed again, now showing real-time feeds from civilian population centers throughout Federation space. Massive crowds had gathered in public squares, watching giant screens that were broadcasting Marcus's every word. I'm here to remind your citizens what their government did in their name 3 centuries ago, Marcus said, and to ask them whether they're comfortable with leaders who respond to moral challenges with threats of execution. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Civilian populations throughout the Federation were watching their military leaders threaten to murder an unarmed prisoner who had surrendered himself voluntarily. The contrast between Marcus's calm, reasonable demeanor and the Federation's aggressive response was impossible to ignore. Citizens of the Federation, Marcus addressed the crowds directly. Your leaders are about to order the destruction of this station to eliminate one human who poses no physical threat to anyone. They're willing to sacrifice thousands of their own military personnel rather than engage in honest discussion about the genocide they committed. Protests erupted simultaneously on dozens of worlds as civilian populations demanded their governments explain why assassination was preferable to dialogue. The political pressure was immediate and intense, forcing the Council of Species into an impossible position. Admiral Korath, Marcus said, still speaking to the camera, you have a choice. You can order the destruction of this station and prove to your own people that the Federation resolves moral challenges through violence. Or you can do something your predecessors never tried. Actually listen to what I have to say. The silence stretched for long moments before Admiral Korath's image flickered and disappeared. When it returned, the ancient draconian's scales had shifted to a neutral brown, the color of reluctant acceptance. You have 1 hour, human. Say what you came to say. Marcus nodded respectfully. Thank you, Admiral.